Grace, peace, and love to you from the God who was and who is to come. Amen. So I am constantly reminded by my daughters that any references that I make are old, and so this will not be unlike those. How many people remember the movie City Slickers? I just said this last night with a group of people who were under the age of 23, and none of them had seen it. So there's something wrong with the universe when that's true. It's a great movie. It's a great movie. Rent it, or you don't have to rent it. Just, you know how to get to it. Watch this movie. It's fantastic. It's very fun. And in it, you meet Curly, right? And he says, you know the secret to life is? It's one thing. Just one thing. You figure it out, you stick to it. Everything else don't mean stuff. That's what he said, right? Something like that. Yeah. What is and then he says, well, what's the one thing? We have to, that's the whole trick. So you have to figure out what is your one thing. What is the one thing that you need to dedicate? What is the thing? And once you know what you be, oftentimes it's connected to, if you ask the second question, like, what would you be willing to die for? Right? What would you be willing to die for? And once you know what you're willing to die for, then you might be willing to explore what you might be willing to live for. What matters most to you? Is it people? Are they specific people? Is it your sense of country, or is it your sense of your faith? What is it? Right? What is your one thing? What is the thing that you would go ahead and push all your chips in, even if you had a lousy hand, just to say, this matters most to me? I think, in many ways, knowing what that one thing is, and the process by which you decide what that one thing is in fact the process of seeking wisdom. Wisdom, brothers and sisters, I don't need to tell you this, wisdom is in short supply right now in our culture, right? Data is not information, information is not knowledge, knowledge is not understanding, and understanding is not wisdom. We think in this information age, if I can Google it, then I'm wiser. But you just have more information. And you've also taken out the process of wonder. Having more facts does not make you smarter. In fact, sometimes it means pulling away all the distractions and all the facts so you can get down to what is calling you to deep wisdom, the way of wisdom, the understanding of what matters most. What is your one thing? We have the story today. It's a fascinating story to me. It's Martha invites Jesus into her house. That's a great thing to do. She shows hospitality, and as she's preparing the meal, she has a request. She says, don't you see my sister Mary sitting right in front of you, listening to you? She should be helping me. I'm doing all the work. Couple things that are important to note. First of all, in that culture at that time, women often wouldn't be sitting down listening to a rabbi. That was not really the role for women. And Jesus seems to be welcoming that, which is showing that he's far more egalitarian than his time about understanding women's role in terms of religious education. The other thing I want to point out, as Cindy Jones pointed out this last week when we went to a colleague group meeting, and she said, why didn't she say, hey, could you get James and Peter and John to get up and help me with dinner and all the other things? And so we see the patriarchy that's already inherent in Martha. Or maybe it's just a sibling thing, right? Why is my sister getting away with just listening? What's happening there? Because there they are. Mary's just listening to the Jesus that she loves. She's trying to understand this way of wisdom, his one thing that matters most. And so Jesus responds to Martha, 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 you are worried and upset about many things, but one thing is needed. Mary has chosen what is better, and it will not be taken away from her. He protects her path. Isn't that great? She's chosen a path. Notice he doesn't say to her, well, you should be sitting here too, Martha. Because Martha has chosen a path, and that will not be taken away from her. Everyone gets to choose their path, and whatever path you choose, God is honoring you in the midst of that path. That first part, you are worried and upset about many things. Doesn't that sound like, oh, I don't know, your life? Maybe my life too? There's so many things. We have a new thing. When I was growing up, I remember that the worst thing that could happen while you were driving was called driving while intoxicated, drunk driving. Now we have distracted driving. Right? That's causing a lot of accidents because we're distracted. But that's just in driving. I think we are distracted by many things. How many people, and I'll be honest because we could all take a look at what your FaceTime on your phone basically says. How many of you check your phone for some news feed or some social media feed 5 times a day? Let's see. Raise your hands. Come on, confession's good for the soul, right? Have anybody tried a fast, an intentional fast for a season of not looking at their phone for, say, a week? Anyone tried that out? Yeah. I recommend it. I recommend, because for me what happens is distraction cheapens my life. It doesn't help me focus on what matters most. The truth of the matter is we're oftentimes, especially with social media, we're always, let's be honest, social media, Facebook, that's not people's real lives, right? That's the curated life I want you to see about me. So then we worry, maybe I'm not going to be seen in the right light. Maybe my life doesn't seem to be as happy as everyone who seems to be posting up gourmet dinners and vacations that they've taken. Maybe I ought to live my life more fully, or maybe my life just isn't as good. But that's a quick path to unhappiness. The question is, and this is with all these distractions, can we just sit in silence until silence quiets us? Until we get to listen to maybe that desire that gets us closer to what is our one true thing. Well, I want to invite us to do that today and to listen just for a bit to Jesus. I want us to get into the role of Mary and to just listen. What does Jesus have to say in this adventure of listening to him? If we were to listen to Jesus, not to what anyone else says about Jesus, but to listen to Jesus, what will we hear? Well, first thing we'd hear is when he was asked what was the greatest commandment, he started here. Oops, I can't go backwards. Sorry. It said, the first one said, love the Lord your God with all your heart and soul and mind and strength. That is to love God with everything that you have. And then the second one he said is like unto it, it's this. Love your neighbor as yourself. If we were to follow Jesus, if we were to follow his way of wisdom, we would be wanting to love God fully by loving our neighbor as ourselves. He put those two together for a reason. It's really important to understand that when we love our neighbor as ourselves, that is to say, to not see that there is a difference between me and my neighbor, to see my neighbor as myself, regardless of where they were born, regardless of their skin color or their sexual orientation or their gender identity, regardless of any other factor, I would see my neighbor and love her as myself. And in so doing, I love God. That means making sure that my neighbor has what I would want for life: respect, care, place, integrity, dignity, identity, protection. That I would want for them what I want for my children, what I want for my own life. And when I do that, God is pleased and loved. I think that just telling God, I love you, I love you, I love you 15 times doesn't really stroke a God because God has no ego to be stroked. Instead, loving other people is how we do that. Want to go deeper into that second part? Jesus says, forgive as the Lord has forgiven you. Forgiveness is a path. It is not really a destination. People often ask, something happens in their lives and saying, Pastor, I just don't know how I'm going to forgive that. And the answer is, well, it's not going to happen like just a decision, that you're just going to forgive it. In fact, the thing is, you're going to choose a path. You're going to say, I'm mad as all get out, and I'm feeling wronged and I'm hurt, but I'm going to start the path of forgiveness. I'm going to start walking this way, trusting that God will continually meet me along the way and get me to where I need to get to. It is a hard road, but it changes us. And the thing that helps us get there, the gas for that engine, is understanding how we have also been forgiven, how we've been made whole as a gift. And so if we live in that space, we can begin to access the energy to let go. Little secret, the person that you're forgiving doesn't even need to know that you're forgiving them. It's about you being unburdened so that you're more free to love. And while you're loving, notice that Jesus doesn't say to just love your friends, but he invites us to love our enemies. In this age of polarization, think about who's on the opposite side of whatever aisle you want to think of, or any ideology you think of. And then take a big breath and know that God is saying, love them. Can you love that person or those people? Can you love them in a way that has integrity, that isn't just, you can't fakey schmakey this, right? To really actually wish them to be well, wish them to be whole, and to wish them to be at peace and at ease, to wish them to be successful, to wish them to be loved. To do that for our enemies, Jesus says, is going to be a radical act. I think that it's one of the easiest to identify as a Christian virtue that Jesus said, but also the hardest to find in the Christian church, is to the love of enemies. And I say that as a person who has always heard it and struggled, but know that it's for me. Jesus also said we need to care for the poor, to be very, very clear about that. That ultimately, over and over, he keeps talking about this Jubilee year where all the debts are forgiven and the slaves are set free, and all those things that hindered people from full participation in society are gone, and now they get to live full lives. And that we're supposed to be about that project. So anything that systemically keeps people in poverty, that systemically keeps them ostracized, we're to fight against that, because that exactly is the thing that God sees as injustice. And then to go further with that and say we are to be with the most vulnerable. This is what Jesus calls us to do. Love God, love your neighbor, forgive, love your enemies, be with the most vulnerable, and care for the poor. Walk alongside people who have no choice but to walk towards safety and freedom. So, here's a Venn diagram for us. There's all the things in the world that matter, and there's the things that we can control. And where there's that overlap, that may be, in terms of living our life, that may be our one thing. That may be, as a church, the place where we get to put our hand to the plow and try and till some soil in that area. What things can we actually affect if we worked together? And remembering all the time that it is always supposed to be rooted in love. It starts with our own sense of knowing how loved we are, and then being able to radiate that out, first to those that are obviously easier to love, but then keep those circles like the ripples on a pond going out until it includes people that you'd be surprised to see around that circle, and eventually to even those people who you consider enemies. When we do that, we are listening to Jesus, as Mary did. We're discovering our one true thing, and we're reordering our vision of the world. Amen. Our song of response